You never really notice the moment your life begins to change. It doesn't happen in one loud burst, but in quiet shifts, the way light fades from a room at sunset. You think everything is the same until one day, you look around and realize the warmth is gone. I remember when my son was little, his laughter filled this house. I would wake before dawn to cook for him, pack his school lunch, and sit by the window just to watch him run down the street. Those mornings were my prayer, unspoken, but felt. After his father died, it was just me and my boy. I worked until my hands ached, telling myself every pain was a promise, that he would never feel hunger or fear. When he grew into a kind man, I believed my sacrifices had meaning. Then he met her. Beautiful, quiet, polite. I thought she was a blessing. I prayed for them every night, asking God to give them a happy life. For a while, it seemed my prayers were answered. She called me a mother, he asked for my recipes, smiled with warmth that felt real. But slowly, things began to change. She stopped visiting, stopped calling. My son's voice grew distant too. When I came to their home, she opened the door halfway and said, "The babe is sleeping." I left food by the door, pretending not to notice her coldness. When the baby was born, I thought things would get better. Holding him, I felt life again. But soon, she began taking him from my arms, avoiding my eyes. I heard my name whispered between their arguments. I stayed silent, though my heart was breaking. That night, I realized something had shifted forever. The love I had built my world around was beginning to slip away, quietly, like light leaving a room. Days became slower after that night. I tried to keep myself busy, cleaning the same shelves, cooking for no one, waiting for footsteps that never came. I told myself that distance was normal, that every child grows away from their mother. But silence has a sound when it lasts too long, a sound that presses against your heart until you can barely breathe. Sometimes my son called, but our talks were short. He said he was tired, that work was stressful. I could hear her voice in the background, soft, sharp, controlling. When I asked about the baby, he said, "He is fine, mother. We'll visit soon." But soon it never came. I began to write letters I never sent. Pages full of things I couldn't say aloud, how proud I was of him, how I missed his laughter, how I forgave him even before he asked. I kept them in a small box beside my bed, my secret way of holding on. One afternoon, I went to their home unannounced. The baby had just started walking, and I couldn't resist. She opened the door, looked at me, and said coldly, "You should have called first." My heart sank, but I smiled and said, "I just wanted to see my grandson." She sighed, let me in, but every moment I felt her eyes watching me, judging me. The baby toddled toward me, smiling. For a second, everything felt right again. But when she saw him reach for me, she pulled him away. That look, that tiny flicker of possession, told me everything. I was no longer welcome in their happiness. That night, I sat in the dark, holding one of his old toys in my hands, and whispered to myself, maybe this is how love fades, not in anger, but in silence. Weeks passed, and the distance turned into a wall. I would call, and sometimes she answered instead of him. Her tone was polite but cold, every word carefully measured. "He's busy," as she'd say. "We'll come by when we can." But they never did. I began to sense that she wanted me gone from their lives completely. She didn't shout, she didn't accuse, she just erased me quietly. My son, caught between us, didn't see it. Or maybe he did, but didn't want to face it. Love can make a man blind, especially when guilt and loyalty are mixed together. I tried to visit again, this time with a basket of fruit and some soup. She opened the door and smiled, that thin, sharp smile that hides contempt. "We're just leaving," she said. I saw my son behind her, holding the baby, eyes tired. I wanted to hug him, to remind him that he still had a mother who would love him no matter what. But all I could do was nod. When I came home that day, the silence of my house felt heavier than ever. I sat by the window for hours, watching the sun fall and the shadows stretch across the floor. I prayed, as I always did, asking God not for justice, but for peace, for the strength to accept that love sometimes means stepping aside. But my heart still ached for the boy who once ran into my arms, who used to say, "A mother, you're my whole world." Now he lived in another world entirely, one where I no longer belonged. At night, I would talk to his father's photo, as if he could hear me. "You'd be proud of him," I'd whisper. "His kind, but his lost." And I'd wonder if maybe I was the one who lost him first, by loving too much, by never learning how to let go. One evening, the phone rang, a sound that startled me now more than it comforted. It was him. His voice trembled, soft and tired, the way it used to sound when he was a boy caught doing something wrong. "Mom," he said, "can I come over for a few days?" My heart nearly stopped. "Of course," I said without hesitation. "Your home is always open." When he arrived, he looked thinner, older somehow, as though the years had folded heavily on his shoulders. He hugged me tightly, longer than usual, and for a moment I felt everything return to how it used to be. But then he pulled away, and I saw the weight in his eyes. We sat down for tea, and silence filled the room. Finally, he said, "She left. Took the baby, said she needed space." His voice cracked, and my heart broke again, not because she was gone, but because pain had found my son. I wanted to say, "I warned you, or you deserve better," but I didn't. A mother's love has no room for pride. Instead, I placed my hand over his and said softly, "Then maybe now you can find yourself again." He stayed for weeks. The house, once empty, breathed again. I made his favorite dishes, the same recipes my own mother taught me. He began to smile again, slowly. He even laughed once, truly laughed, and it echoed through the kitchen like sunlight breaking through clouds. But I knew it couldn't last. The world outside was waiting. The phone rang again. This time it was her. He left that same night, without saying much. I watched from the window as his car disappeared into the distance, my heart whispering a quiet prayer, "Don't lose yourself again, my son." And then the silence returned. Only this time, it wasn't heavy, it was hollow. Like an echo of everything I had ever loved, fading into the walls. Days turned into weeks, and the house settled back into its quiet rhythm, the ticking clock, the hum of the kettle, the wind brushing softly against the window panes. I tried to keep myself busy. I watered the plants, mended old clothes, baked bread I never finished. But everything I touched carried the scent of memories, of him running through the hallway as a boy, of laughter that once filled these rooms. Sometimes, I caught myself setting the table for two. Old habits die hard, especially the ones built from love. I'd pour a second cup of tea, then stare at it until it went cold. It felt strange to realize that even silence can be loud when you have no one to share it with. At night, I would lie awake, thinking about all the moments I had swallowed my words, all the times I wanted to tell him that his wife's lies were poisoning his heart. But I didn't. Because a mother's duty, I thought, was to protect her child from pain, even if it meant enduring it herself. Then one morning, I found a photo wedged between the pages of an old cookbook. It was from his wedding day. He looked so happy, so sure. I touched the picture and whispered, "You believed love would save you." I smiled bitterly. So did I, once. I began to write letters, not to send, just to speak what was left unsaid. I wrote about the day he was born, about the way he used to cling to my hand when he was scared. I wrote about forgiveness, and how sometimes it arrives too late. But one evening, as the sky turned crimson, I heard a knock at the door. I thought it was a dream at first. Then, through the glass, I saw him standing there, tired, unshaven, holding a small suitcase. When I opened the door, he simply said, "She's gone. For good this time." And I knew, without words, that everything had come full circle. He stepped inside slowly, like someone walking into a memory. His eyes wandered around the room, landing on every small thing that hadn't changed: the old armchair, the framed photo of him as a child, the faded curtains his father once hung. He let out a quiet sigh. "I forgot how small this place is," he said softly. I smiled. "It's not small," I replied. "It's just enough." We sat by the window again, just as we used to. I poured him tea, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the clinking of cups and the slow rhythm of the clock on the wall. Then, almost as if confessing a sin, he whispered, "Mom, I didn't believe you." About her. About everything. I said nothing. I just looked at him, the same boy who once hid behind my skirts when thunder struck, now a man finally facing the storm within himself. "She told me you hated her," he continued. "That you wanted to turn me against her." And I believed it. I said terrible things to you. I don't even know why I did. Tears welled in his eyes, and I felt my own heart tremble. "Because love can blind us," I said gently. "And blindness is not a sin, my son. It's just a stage before we learn to see." He nodded, unable to speak. And then, for the first time in years, he cried, not the quiet kind of crying men hide, but the raw, broken kind that comes from the soul. I let him. I didn't tell him to stop. I just held his hand and whispered, "You're home now." Outside, the wind rustled the trees like a soft applause, as if even the world was relieved that he had finally come back, not just to me, but to himself. That night, after he fell asleep on the couch, I sat beside him for a long time, just watching. His face looked peaceful for once, almost like when he was a boy dreaming after a long day of play. I thought about all the nights I had stayed awake praying for this, for his peace, for his heart to return home unbroken. I covered him with a blanket, careful not to wake him, and whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Not for what was lost, but for what had finally found its way back. The next morning, sunlight filled the room like forgiveness. He woke up slowly, stretching, blinking into the light. "It feels different here," he said. "Quieter, but warm." I smiled. Peace feels like that sometimes. You only notice it when you've lived too long without it. He helped me in the kitchen, clumsy but eager. He cut the bread too thick, spilled tea twice, and laughed every time. That laughter, it healed parts of me I didn't know were still wounded. We talked for hours. Not about her, not about what went wrong, but about everything else. About the time he caught fireflies as a boy. About his father's old jokes. About the neighbors who still asked about him. It felt like building a bridge over years of silence, plank by plank. When the sun began to set, he looked out the window and said quietly, "I don't know what I'll do next." "You live," I said simply. "And you'll learn that love isn't always about holding on." Sometimes it's about letting go and still wishing them well. He looked at me with eyes full of something between sorrow and understanding. You always knew what to say. I laughed softly. No, my son. I just learned to listen to what life kept repeating. Days passed, and the house began to feel alive again. I cooked more, laughed more. Even the birds outside seemed to sing louder, as if they too sensed the air had softened. My son helped repair the old fence, repainted the porch, and sometimes just sat on the steps staring at the horizon like he was searching for a new version of himself there. One afternoon, as we drank tea under the apricot tree, he said, Mom, I think I was afraid to come back here. Afraid you wouldn't forgive me. I looked at him, my heart aching in that gentle way only mothers know. Forgiveness isn't something you wait for, I said. It's something that's been waiting for you. He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. You always make it sound simple. Because it is, I said. We're the ones who make it heavy. He stayed for weeks, and I cherished every second, every shared breakfast, every quiet evening. Sometimes I'd watch him from the window, fixing things around the house, and think of how life had brought him full circle. He had been lost once, to love, to pride, to pain, but now he was finding his way, piece by piece. Yet, deep down, I knew that one day he would have to leave again. Not out of selfishness, but because life doesn't let us stay where it healed us. It sends us back to where we broke, to rebuild from the beginning. So when he finally said, Mom, I think I need to start over somewhere new, I just nodded. Then go, I told him. But go with peace this time. He hugged me tightly, and I felt his heart against mine, strong, steady, alive. Thank you, he whispered. For what? I asked. For never turning the light off, he said. And when he drove away that morning, I stood at the window again, just like before. But this time, the silence didn't hurt. It just existed, gentle, honest, full of meaning. After he left, the house felt quiet again, but not empty. There's a difference, I've learned. Emptiness is when something is missing. Quiet is when something has been fulfilled. I began to move slower, not out of sadness but acceptance. I watered the flowers he planted before he left. I cooked his favorite soup, even if there was no one to share it with. The smell filled the house like a memory that didn't hurt anymore. Sometimes, when the wind blew through the open window, I could almost hear his laughter echoing faintly, blending with the creak of the old walls. I smiled then, not with longing, but with gratitude. I often thought about the years that had passed, about how easily love can twist into pain when pride takes root. I remembered his wife, her eyes that never met mine, her voice dripping with false sweetness. For a long time, I blamed her. But as I grew older, I understood. Broken people break others. She must have been fighting her own battles, ones I could never see. Forgiving her didn't mean excusing her cruelty. It just meant I refused to carry her darkness any longer. Every morning I walked to the small bench in the garden, the one my husband built years ago. I'd sit there with my tea, watching the sky shift colors. Life, I realized, is not about what we keep, it's about what we learn to release. Sometimes my son would call. His voice sounded different now, lighter, stronger. He'd talk about work, friends, plans. Once he said, Mom, I finally feel like myself again. And my heart smiled. Because that's all I ever wanted. Not his success. Not his return. Just his peace. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, I sat by the window and watched the last rays fade into gold. The world outside looked calm, untouched, but inside me, there was a soft ache that came not from sadness, but from remembering too much. I thought about my younger years, the days when life felt endless and love seemed strong enough to carry everything. I remembered my husband's laughter, the warmth of his hands, the way he'd say, one day, our boy will grow taller than the house." He had been right, in more ways than one. After he passed, I promised myself I would give our son everything. And I did. I gave him my time, my health, my heart, all that I was. But love, I've learned, can't protect someone from their own choices. It can only light the path and hope they follow. I remember the first time his wife came to visit. She had soft eyes and a smile that could convince anyone. I wanted to believe she loved him purely, but something in her gaze made me uneasy. I dismissed it, told myself I was being overprotective. But a mother's instinct rarely lies. Over time, I watched her tighten her grip on him, isolating him, turning his world smaller, making him question even my affection. I wanted to speak, but every word I tried to say turned to dust in my throat. If I fought her, I'd lose him faster. So, I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence is not peace. It's survival. Now, sitting here years later, I wonder if I did the right thing. Maybe if I had spoken sooner, he wouldn't have fallen so deep. But then again, maybe he needed to fall to finally see. I've stopped trying to rewrite the past. I simply let it sit beside me like an old friend who no longer hurts me to remember. The seasons kept turning, each one softer than the last. I found myself learning to live with the rhythm of quiet days. Morning tea. The creak of the garden gate. The smell of old books. There was a strange beauty in the ordinary, something I had overlooked for years while I was too busy loving others more than myself. Sometimes, I would walk to the edge of the village, where the road bends toward the mountains. I'd watch people pass, young couples, children chasing each other, old friends greeting in laughter. I no longer felt envy, only a kind of distant tenderness. Life moves in circles, and mine had already come full. My son called often now. He told me about his new job, the people he met, the city lights that made the night seem alive. There was joy in his voice, the kind that comes from quiet rebuilding, not instant happiness. "Once," he said, "Mom, I've met someone new." I smiled before he could even finish. "Then treat her with patience," I said, "and never let pride speak louder than love." He laughed softly. "You still sound like you know everything." "No," I said, "I just know what pain taught me." After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. The lamp flickered gently beside me, and I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the warmth of company, it was peace. Real, earned peace. I thought about how love, in the end, is not about being needed. It's about being remembered kindly. If my son could think of me one day and smile instead of ache, then I had done my part. The night deepened, and I whispered to myself, and maybe this is what healing feels like, not forgetting, but remembering without pain. One morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, wrapped in that blue stillness that comes before sunrise. I made tea and sat by the window, the same place where I had watched him leave so many times before. The steam rose gently, like a fragile ghost of every memory that once haunted this room. I thought about how life had unfolded, not as I planned, but as it needed to. All those years I spent holding everything together, believing love meant sacrifice. I realize now it also means knowing when to let go. There was a time I feared loneliness more than death itself. But loneliness, I learned, can be a teacher. It strips you bare, forces you to listen to your own heartbeat, to learn who you are without the noise of others. I began to write again. Little things, thoughts, prayers, small pieces of wisdom I wanted my son, and perhaps his child, to one day read. I wrote about kindness, about patience, about how strength is not in hardness but in endurance. Sometimes, while writing, I would smile, remembering the chaos, the laughter, the tears, all of it. My story wasn't grand or tragic. It was simply human. A woman who loved too deeply, hurt too quietly, and lived long enough to understand the beauty of both. I don't regret anything now. Even the mistakes feel sacred, like steps on a long road that led me here, to peace, to stillness, to understanding. The sun rose slowly, washing the sky with gold. I whispered softly to myself, "You did your best." And for the first time, I truly believed it. Later that day, as I walked through the garden, I noticed the apricot tree had started to bloom again. Its petals were small, fragile, but stubbornly alive. I touched one of the branches and thought how much it reminded me of my own life. Bent, scarred, yet still finding a way to blossom each spring. The air smelled of new beginnings, and for a brief moment I imagined my husband standing by the fence, smiling the way he used to. "You've done well," he would say. "You kept the promise." I closed my eyes and smiled back at the memory. Yes, I had kept the promise, to raise our son with love, to stay strong, to never let bitterness win. And though the years had taken much, they had also given me something deeper, peace that no storm could touch. That evening, as I sat on the porch with my old shawl around my shoulders, the phone rang again. It was my son. His voice carried warmth, excitement, something new. "Mom," he said, "I wanted you to be the first to know." She said yes. "I'm getting married." My heart skipped a beat, but this time, not from fear. "Tell me about her," I said softly. He did. And as he spoke, I could hear in his tone that this love was different, not born of illusion, but of truth. He said she was kind, patient, someone who respected him and the people he cared about. When we hung up, I sat in silence, letting the joy settle slowly inside me. I looked at the stars, whispering a prayer of gratitude. Not just for his happiness, but for the long, painful journey that led him there. Every heartbreak, every tear, every lonely night, all of it had meaning now. It had shaped us, refined us, prepared us for gentler days. The day of his wedding came quietly. I wore a simple blue dress, the one he had always said made me look like the sky after rain. I didn't travel far, but far enough to stand in the crowd, to see him waiting at the altar. He looked calm this time, not lost or afraid. He stood tall, certain. When his bride walked down the aisle, I saw in her eyes what I had prayed to see for years, sincerity. Not perfection, but warmth. During the ceremony, I felt tears rise, but they weren't from sadness. They were from relief. From knowing that sometimes, even broken stories can find a gentle ending. When they exchanged vows, his voice didn't tremble the way it did years ago. It was steady, a man who had learned from pain and turned it into wisdom. Afterward, he came to me, smiling like he hadn't since he was a child. "You came," he said, his voice soft. "Of course," I replied. "I wouldn't miss the moment when my son begins again." He hugged me tightly, and for a second, I felt time fold, as if I were holding both the boy he was and the man he had become. His wife stood beside him, her smile shy but kind. I looked at her and said quietly, "Take care of him, and he'll take care of you." She nodded. "I promise." That night, when I returned home, the house felt full even in its silence. The laughter from the wedding still echoed faintly in my ears, and I realized my story wasn't ending. It was simply changing shape. As I sat by the window, moonlight spilling over my hands, I whispered to the stars, "Is happy now?" And for the first time in many years, my heart answered, "So am I." In the weeks after the wedding, the days passed like calm waves, steady, soft, unhurried. I found myself smiling more often, humming old songs as I moved about the house. The loneliness that once sat in every corner had turned into quiet company. I no longer feared the silence. I understood it now. It wasn't emptiness, it was peace. Every Sunday, my son called. Sometimes his wife joined the call, her laughter bright and gentle in the background. They spoke of small things, their garden, the new curtain she had sewn, his long hours at work. Ordinary things. Yet to me, they felt extraordinary. Because behind every word, I could hear it, balance. Something I had prayed for so long ago. One evening, he said, "Mom, I want to bring you here for a while. There's a guest room. We'd love to have you." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Maybe one day," I answered. "For now, I'm where I'm meant to be." He didn't insist. He understood. That was how I knew he had truly grown. That night, I sat on the porch again, the stars sharp and endless above me. The wind carried the faint scent of jasmine, and I closed my eyes. I thought about how love changes, how it begins as a fire, fierce and bright, but if it survives, it softens into light that never goes out. I realized I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was part of his story, the foundation that held while the walls were rebuilt. And that was enough. I took a deep breath, feeling gratitude spill quietly through me. "Thank you," I whispered into the night, to life, to time, to God, to everything that had broken and healed me. One morning, as the first light slipped through the curtains, I woke with a strange feeling, not sadness, not fear, but a deep, gentle stillness. I made my tea, the same way I always did, and sat by the window. The world outside shimmered with dew, the sky stretching pale and endless. It was then I realized how much life had changed, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in quiet ones. The weight in my chest that once pressed with worry was gone. In its place, there was space, space for calm, for memory, for peace. I looked at the old photo on the shelf, my husband holding our little boy, both laughing as the sun caught their faces. I touched the frame lightly. "We did it," I whispered. "He's okay now." Some days, I still missed them, both the man I loved and the boy he left me with. But missing doesn't always hurt. Sometimes, it's just love that refuses to fade. I spent my afternoons writing letters again, not to send, just to keep. Words for my son, for his children, for anyone who might one day wonder who I was. I wrote about faith, about forgiveness, about the quiet strength that comes from surviving storms without losing tenderness. As the sun began to set, I stepped outside. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of the earth cooling down. Birds were returning home, their wings cutting through the pink sky. I stood there for a while, breathing it all in, and thought, this is enough. Life had taken so much and given so much more in return. And now, standing in that golden light, I understood something simple but true. Even when everything changes, love remains, not as a flame, but as a steady, endless glow. As the days slipped quietly into autumn, I began to notice how the world mirrored my own heart, softer, slower, more accepting of its fading colors. The trees outside my window turned amber and gold, and every leaf that fell seemed to whisper, It's all right to let go. I spent my mornings walking through the garden, feeling the chill of the air, the pulse of life still humming beneath the soil. Even as the flowers withered, their roots held strong beneath the surface. That thought comforted me, that endings, too, could be beautiful. Sometimes my son would visit on weekends. He'd bring small things, homemade bread, honey, sometimes just his laughter. His wife came too, always polite, always kind. They never stayed long, but the time we shared felt full. Once, as we sat by the fire, he said, Mom, I finally understand how much you carried." I smiled gently. "Every mother carries something," I told him. "But we don't measure the weight. We just walk with it." He took my hand and said, "I hope I can be as strong as you." "Strength," I said, "isn't loud. It's quiet. It's waking up every day and choosing love again, even after everything." When they left that evening, I stood at the doorway, watching their car fade into the distance. I didn't cry this time. Instead, I whispered a small prayer of thanks, not for what I had lost, but for what I had been given, the chance to love, to endure, to see life come full circle. Later, as night fell, I lit a candle and sat in the soft glow. Its light flickered against the walls like a heartbeat. I thought of all the years, all the faces, all the moments that had shaped me, and I realized something. My story wasn't about sorrow or sacrifice. It was about faith. The kind that survives the dark and keeps glowing quietly long after the fire fades. Winter arrived quietly that year. The first snow fell like a whisper, covering the garden in a soft white silence. I watched from the window, wrapped in my shawl, the same one I had worn through so many seasons. Everything looked still, untouched, as if the world itself was pausing to breathe. I thought of how many winters I had lived through, each one carrying its own memories. Some cold with grief, others warm with laughter. But this one felt different. Peaceful. Complete. I spent the days tending to small things, making soup, mending old blankets, writing in my worn notebook. My hands trembled a little now, but the words still came. I wrote not out of need, but out of love. Love for the boy who became a man, for the man who became a husband, for the mother I once was, and for the woman I had become. One evening, my son called. His voice was soft, familiar. "Mom," he said, "I wanted you to know, we're expecting." I froze, my heart swelling with something too big for words. "A baby?" I whispered. He laughed. "Yes. You're going to be a grandmother." For a moment, the room seemed to fill with light. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat echo against the years. "Then life," I said slowly, "has begun again." We talked for a long time. When the call ended, I sat by the fire and let the warmth soak into my bones. I closed my eyes and smiled through quiet tears. A new generation, a new chapter. Outside, the snow kept falling, steady and gentle. I thought about how love moves, not in a straight line, but in circles. It ends, begins again, and carries pieces of us forward. And I realized I was no longer just a mother. I was part of something that would continue long after me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of a child, their child, stirred something deep within me, like an old melody remembered after years of silence. I sat by the window and watched the snow, the same way I used to when I was young, waiting for him to come home from work. Back then, life was simpler, though it never felt that way. We worried about bills, about the roof leaking, about dreams we hadn't yet reached. But even in the struggle, there was warmth. There was always laughter between the storms. I remember how he used to come in, his boots heavy with snow, his cheeks red from the wind. He'd shake his head, smile, and say, "Ere another day survived." And I'd answer, "Ere another day lived." We'd share soup, sit by the fire, and talk about nothing and everything, our plans, our fears, the things we wanted for our son. Now, those days are only echoes. Sometimes I hear his voice when the wind moves through the trees. Sometimes I feel his hand when I reach for the teapot. People say time heals, but I think time only teaches you how to live with the ache. It becomes part of you, like a quiet friend who never leaves. The morning after the call, I went to the attic. There, under old boxes and forgotten linens, I found the little cradle he had built long ago, hand-carved, simple, but strong. I ran my fingers over the wood, the same wood that once held our baby as he slept. I smiled. Maybe it could hold another child now. Maybe love could travel through time, through generations, carried in wood, in lullabies, in memory. I decided I would fix it, sand the edges, polish the surface, sew a new blanket. It would be my gift. Not just a cradle, but a piece of our story reborn. As I stood there, I whispered, "You see, my love? It begins again." And for the first time in years, I felt him beside me, quiet, proud, eternal. The days passed softly after that. I began waking earlier, as if the sunrise itself whispered purpose into my bones. My hands, though tired and lined with years, remembered the rhythm of work, the way wood responds to patience, how fabric listens when you stitch it with care. Each morning, I opened the windows wide, letting in the cold, honest air. The house smelled of tea and pine. I hummed old lullabies, the ones I sang when my boy was small and the world outside still felt kind. The cradle waited in the corner, half restored, glowing in the dim light. Sometimes, while sanding the edges, I thought of her, my daughter-in-law. The bitterness in her eyes, the sharpness of her words. I used to wonder what turned her heart so cruel. Was it fear? Was it pain? Or was it something darker, the kind of emptiness that grows when love is treated like a game? I never hated her. Even when she lied, even when she poisoned my son's thoughts against me, I prayed for her. I asked God to soften her heart, to remind her of the goodness she must have once known. But some people, they run so far from the light that even forgiveness can't reach them right away. My son stopped visiting for a while. The silence of his absence was heavier than loneliness. I'd make his favorite soup, set the table for two, and wait, foolishly, tenderly. The soup would grow cold, the candles would burn low, and I'd sit there, whispering his name into the quiet. When he finally came, his eyes were tired. He didn't speak much, just looked around the house as if it had aged too. I wanted to hold him, to tell him he was still my little boy, that no matter how much the world hardened him, my love hadn't changed. But I said nothing. Sometimes love is better spoken in silence. That night, I prayed longer than usual. I prayed not for justice, not for revenge, but for peace, for my son's eyes to open before it was too late, for the truth to find its way through the noise. And deep down, I knew it would. One evening, as I was folding laundry, the phone rang. His voice trembled, the kind of tremble that carries both shame and awakening. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I've made a mistake." I didn't need to ask what he meant. A mother always knows. His words cracked something open inside me, but not out of anger, out of sorrow and relief, all at once. It was as if a long, cold winter had finally begun to thaw. He told me she had left. Took the money, the jewelry, even the savings I'd once given him to start their life together. She'd gone with another man. And the worst part, he said, was not that she betrayed him, but that he'd lost himself trying to please someone who never saw his worth. I listened. I didn't interrupt. His pain spilled through the line, raw and unfiltered, and all I could do was breathe with him. When he stopped speaking, there was silence, a heavy, human silence that filled every corner of my heart. Come home, I finally whispered. Just come home. When he arrived, he looked like a ghost of himself. Eyes sunken, shoulders bent. I didn't recognize the man at first, only the boy inside him, the one who used to run barefoot through the garden, laughing, covered in dirt. I made tea, the way I always did when the world felt too cruel. He sat at the table, his hands trembling around the cup. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Sometimes words aren't needed. Sometimes love breathes quietly between two people who have hurt and healed each other too many times to count. After a while, he looked up and said, I'm sorry, Mom. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness isn't something you give. It's something that's born when both hearts are ready. I reached across the table, touched his hand, and smiled. You're home now, I said. That's all that matters. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow, soft, endless. The house felt alive again after he returned. It was as if laughter had found its way back through the cracks in the walls. The kettle sang again, and the smell of bread filled the kitchen. My son started helping me in small ways, fixing the window hinge, chopping wood, sweeping the floor without being asked. There was still sadness in his eyes, a quiet kind that never really leaves, but something inside him was healing. Sometimes I would catch him staring out the window at the old apple tree, lost in thought. Once, I asked what he was thinking about, and he said softly, I wasted so much time, didn't I? I shook my head. Time isn't wasted, I told him. Even pain teaches you something if you let it. He smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, that smile looked like his father's. It made my heart ache in a sweet, familiar way. Days turned into weeks. We started repairing things together, not just the house, but our hearts. We fixed the roof, mended the garden fence, repainted the door. It felt symbolic somehow, as if each nail and brushstroke was stitching the torn fabric of our past. Sometimes at night, I would sit alone by the window, the same way I always had, but the loneliness was softer now. The wind didn't sound so cruel. I thought of the cradle upstairs, finished at last. It gleamed in the corner, wrapped in a handmade quilt. I imagined a baby's laughter filling this house again someday, not now, but maybe one day, when love returns in its true form. And though I never said it out loud, I thanked God for bringing my boy back to me. Maybe we both had to be broken to understand the meaning of love, not the kind that demands, but the kind that endures. As I turned off the lamp that night, I whispered to myself, and maybe this is what new beginnings look like, not loud, not grand, but gentle. Weeks drifted by quietly. The rhythm of life returned, slow, deliberate, almost sacred. Every sound in the house felt meaningful again, the creak of the floorboards, the tick of the clock, the soft clatter of dishes after breakfast. It was as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years, waiting for this peace. My son started reading again. Books he once loved but abandoned during his marriage. I'd find him sitting by the window in the evenings, the golden light touching his face, a faint calm in his eyes. Sometimes he'd read aloud to me, just as he did when he was a boy. His voice, once heavy with anger and pride, had softened. It carried warmth again. One night, after dinner, he asked, Do you think people can truly change, Mom? I thought for a while before answering. Yes, I said. But only when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of changing. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. I knew he was thinking about her, the woman who had left him, taken his trust, his money, his peace. Yet even now, I couldn't bring myself to speak ill of her. She was gone, and what mattered was what remained. Later, I found him sitting by the old cradle in the attic. His hand rested gently on the wood. "You kept this all these years?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "It reminded me of hope." He didn't answer, but I saw the tears in his eyes. He wasn't just looking at the cradle, he was looking at everything it represented: love, forgiveness, the life that still awaited him beyond loss. That night, I prayed again, not for him to forget, but for him to remember who he was before the world taught him to be guarded. Before lies and pride built walls around his heart. And as I lay down to sleep, I realized something simple yet profound. We can rebuild anything: a house, a bond, even a soul, as long as there's one small piece left to start from. Spring came quietly that year. The snow melted slower than usual, as if even the earth wanted to linger in its silence before beginning again. I opened the windows and let the cooler move through the house, carrying away the scent of long winters and old memories. My son began helping the neighbors, fixing fences, repairing roofs, chopping wood for the older ones. People started greeting him again with warmth. It was strange but beautiful to see him finding purpose not through success or pride, but through kindness. That was something his father used to say: "A man isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he gives when no one is watching." Sometimes I would watch him from the porch, his sleeves rolled up, his laughter easy. It had been so long since I'd heard him laugh without bitterness. It filled the air like sunlight, touching everything it reached. At night, he'd tell me stories of the people he helped: the old widow who baked him bread in thanks, the little boy who followed him everywhere, calling him uncle. I could see his heart mending, thread by thread. But healing doesn't erase the scars. Some evenings, I'd still find him sitting alone, eyes distant, his hand holding that wedding ring he never threw away. I never asked him why. Some memories aren't meant to be buried, they're meant to remind us that even pain once had meaning. I would pour him tea and sit beside him without a word. Silence became our language, one of comfort, not distance. One night, he looked at me and said, Mom, I want to start over. Somewhere quiet. Maybe build something small of my own." I smiled. "Then build it," I said softly. "But don't forget where you came from, or who taught you to stand back up." He laughed gently, the kind of laugh that trembles between tears and peace. And I realized something: motherhood doesn't end when your child grows. It just changes shape. Sometimes love means holding on, other times it means letting go so they can finally walk free. The day he left to begin his new life was both the proudest and the heaviest day of my years. I woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, his favorite, the same meal I used to make when he was a little boy heading to school with a satchel too big for his shoulders. The air was cool, soft, full of promise. Birds were beginning to sing, timidly at first, then louder as if blessing the day. He came downstairs carrying a small suitcase, his face calm, his eyes clear. There was a quiet confidence about him now, the kind that's born only from surviving your own storms. He sat at the table and smiled at me. "You've done enough for me, Mom," he said. "It's time I take care of myself, and of you, too." I wanted to tell him that he already had, just by becoming the man his father always believed he could be. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I placed my hand over his and said, "You'll always have a home here." no matter how far you go. After breakfast, we stood by the gate for a long moment. The road ahead was bathed in golden light, stretching endlessly into the horizon. He hugged me, not hurriedly like before, but deeply, with a kind of tenderness that said everything words never could. I'll visit soon, he promised. I know, I said, though we both understood that life has its own rhythm, and promises sometimes stretch with time. When he walked away, I didn't cry. Instead, I stood there, feeling the wind brush against my face, carrying with it the scent of earth and beginnings. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel alone, because loneliness doesn't live where love has already taken root. I went back inside, made myself tea, and sat by the window. The chair across from me was empty again, but it no longer hurt the way it used to. I realized that a mother's purpose isn't to be the center of her child's world, it's to help them build a world of their own. And when they finally do, you smile, even through the ache, and whisper to yourself, Athai. Days turned into months after he left, yet the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful, as if it had exhaled a long, heavy breath it had been holding for years. The sunlight found new ways to enter the rooms, dancing on the old walls, reminding me that even stillness can be full of life. I filled my time with little things, tending to the garden, baking bread for neighbors, sewing blankets for the children who lived nearby. I wasn't doing it to stay busy, I was doing it because giving, in small ways, made me feel connected to something greater than myself. Every evening, I'd sit by the window and write in a small notebook, the one my husband gave me long ago. I wrote letters I never intended to send, thoughts I never said out loud. I wrote about love, about pain, about forgiveness. Sometimes I wrote to my son, sometimes to God, sometimes to the woman I used to be. Then, one morning, I received a letter, my son's handwriting, shaky but familiar. Inside was a short note. Mom, I found a small house by the sea. I fix boats now. The air smells like salt and freedom. There's a market here every Sunday, and people laugh easily. I think you'd like it. I'll visit soon, or maybe you can come see me this time. I held that letter close to my heart for a long while. It felt like sunlight made into paper. The next week, I packed a small bag, not because I planned to move, but because I wanted to see him, to see with my own eyes that life had not only forgiven him but embraced him. When I arrived, he was waiting by the shore. The wind played with his hair, and he looked stronger, calmer, like a man who had made peace with his past. We didn't speak for a moment. We just stood there, watching the waves. He turned to me, smiling. You see, Mom? I'm okay. And I realized, yes, he truly was. We walked along the shore for hours that day, our footsteps fading into the sand behind us. The sea was calm, stretching endlessly under a pale blue sky. It smelled of life, of change, of everything that keeps moving no matter how much we wish time would pause. He showed me his little workshop, a wooden shed by the pier, filled with tools, rope, and the scent of fresh varnish. I mend boats now, he said with a quiet pride. People trust me here. They bring me what's broken, and I make it whole again. I smiled. You've always been good at fixing things, I told him. Even yourself, it seems. He laughed softly, looking down. Maybe I learned that from you. Inside the workshop, sunlight spilled through the cracks in the roof, painting golden lines across the dusty floor. I sat on an old chair, listening to the sound of waves outside, to the rhythm of his hands working with care and purpose. I thought of all the years he'd spent searching, for love, for approval, for something that was never lost, only hidden inside him all along. Later, we walked to the market. Children ran between stalls, fishermen shouted greetings, and women bargained over baskets of oranges. It felt alive, beautifully, chaotically alive. He greeted everyone with a smile, and I could see how much he belonged here. As the sun began to set, we sat by the water, sharing roasted corn from a street vendor. He leaned back and said quietly, "I think I understand you now, Mom. You gave everything, even when it wasn't returned. I used to think that was weakness, but now I see it was strength." I looked at him, tears gathering in my eyes. "Love isn't about what you get back," I said. "It's about what remains when everything else is gone." The sky burned gold and crimson, the waves whispering their endless hymn. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt my heart completely still, not from pain, but from peace. That night, he made me sleep in his small seaside house, a simple place with whitewashed walls and the scent of salt in every corner. The waves outside whispered against the shore, steady and gentle, like a heartbeat. I lay awake for a long time, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. My thoughts drifted through the years, the joy, the pain, the silence, the forgiveness. How strange, I thought, that everything painful eventually softens into something tender when you've survived it long enough. In the morning, I woke to the sound of seagulls and the aroma of fresh bread. He was already in the kitchen, humming an old tune I hadn't heard since he was a child. When he noticed me, he smiled, not the forced smile of a man trying to hide his sorrow, but the true one, quiet and real. "Breakfast by the sea," he said, setting a plate before me. "It's better than anything I ever learned before." We ate in silence, watching the waves shimmer in the morning light. Every now and then, he'd glance at me, as if making sure I was really there, not just a memory. After breakfast, we walked again, no destination, just the rhythm of steps and sea breeze. He told me stories about the people in town, the fisherman who lost his boat in a storm but laughed about it, the old woman who fed stray cats every morning. I listened, smiling, realizing how much he'd changed, not just his life, but his spirit. Then he turned to me suddenly and said, "You know, Mom, I never thanked you. Not truly. For staying. For believing in me when I didn't deserve it." I stopped walking and looked at him. "A mother doesn't stay because her child deserves it," I said softly. "She stays because love isn't something you earn, it's something you're born from." He didn't reply, he just reached out and hugged me, long and wordless, the kind of embrace that bridges every year of distance and regret. And as I stood there in his arms, I felt time stop, as if all the broken pieces of our story had finally fallen into place. The next few days passed like a dream I never wanted to wake from. We cooked together, laughed about small things, walked along the beach at sunset. There was no need for grand words anymore. Peace had taken the place of pain, and silence felt warm again. Sometimes, as I watched him fix boats, I thought of his father. The same patience in his movements, the same quiet strength. Life has a way of coming full circle. The things we think are lost forever often find their way back in another form, another generation. In the evenings, we sat by the shore with a small lantern between us. The sea shimmered in silver, the air cool and filled with the scent of salt and night. He would talk about his plans, maybe opening a little repair shop, maybe starting a family one day when the time felt right. I listened with a calm heart. For years, I had feared he would never dream again, but now his voice carried hope. One night, as the stars appeared, he said quietly, "Do you ever regret anything, Mom?" I looked at the sea, its endless motion. "Regret?" I echoed. "Maybe, but not the way you think. I regret the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken. The times I carried too much, thinking it was love. But even those regrets taught me something. They made me softer. He smiled faintly. You're the strongest person I know. I laughed. No, my dear. I just learned that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about learning how to mend yourself with grace. The moon rose higher, reflecting across the water like a silver road stretching toward forever. I thought of everything that had brought us here, every tear, every prayer, every quiet morning waiting for a call that never came. And in that moment, I realized this was the ending I never knew I was waiting for. Not perfect, not grand, but real. A mother and her son, two souls finally at peace, sitting by the sea as the tide whispered of beginnings yet to come. The morning I left the seaside town, the sky was clear and tender, painted in soft shades of gold and blue. My son stood by the car, holding my suitcase, smiling the way he used to when he was a boy about to say goodbye before school. Only now, there was no sadness in that smile, only peace. Will you visit again soon? He asked. I touched his cheek, feeling the faint stubble under my palm, the warmth of his skin. Soon, I said. But don't wait for me. Live your life, my son. That's all a mother ever wants, to see her child living, truly living. He nodded, eyes glistening. I love you, Mom. I know, I whispered. And I love you, more than all the tides and all the sunsets combined. We hugged one last time, a long embrace full of everything that words could never hold, forgiveness, understanding, and the quiet knowing that we had both finally healed. Then I stepped into the car, and as it rolled down the coastal road, I looked back through the window. He was still there, standing by the sea, waving, the wind in his hair. The ocean shimmered behind him, vast and endless, and I thought, life is like that sea, it takes, it gives, and it never truly stops moving. When I returned home, the house welcomed me like an old friend. It no longer felt heavy with ghosts. I made tea, sat by the window, and let the sunlight touch my face. I thought about everything we had lived through, the loneliness, the loss, the silence, and how, through it all, love had remained. I smiled to myself and whispered, so this is what it was all for, not to break us, but to teach us how to stay open, even when it hurts. Outside, a soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of the sea all the way to my little kitchen. I closed my eyes and felt it, the quiet rhythm of life continuing, gentle and eternal. And that's when I knew the story wasn't ending. It was simply changing form, flowing onward, like the tide. Life has a way of circling back, like the tide that always returns to kiss the same shore, even after a storm. We live, we lose, we learn. And somewhere between pain and peace, we find the strength to love again. When I look back now, I don't see tragedy. I see seasons, each one necessary, each one teaching me how to bend without breaking. Love was my spring, loss was my winter, forgiveness my dawn. I used to believe that happiness was something you reached, a place, a moment, a perfect ending. But now I know it's quieter than that. Happiness is a morning cup of tea in an old kitchen. It's the sound of a voice you thought you'd lost forever. It's knowing you did your best, even when no one saw. My son found his peace by the sea. I found mine in the space between memory and now. And maybe that's all we ever need, not a perfect life, but a peaceful heart. So if you're listening to my story, wherever you are, remember this: love without fear, forgive without waiting, and never let the world make you believe that kindness is weakness. It is, and always will be, the greatest strength we have. The years will pass. The faces will fade. But the love you give, it will remain. It always does.